Well, joining me now are Steve Rolls, Senior Policy Analyst at Transform Drug Policy Foundation, and the journalist and author Peter Hitchens. Peter Hitchens first. Testing drugs at festivals, sensible idea, would save lives.
It would save more lives if the police and the courts enforced the law against possessing those drugs and people didn't take them in the first place.
You've got 11,000 people in prison at the moment for drug offences.
You have not got really more than a tiny few people, and they're exceptional, in prison for possession of drugs. Since the 1970s, this country has abandoned any kind of effort to interdict possession of drugs. It's made a certain amount of showy attempt to interdict the supply, but it's done nothing about possession. As a result, possession and use has increased exponentially. The lie which is told repeatedly by the legalisers...
Let me put that point directly to Steve Rolls. I'll come back to you.
He's going to talk about prohibition.
No, I'll come back to you. I want to put that point directly. The problem is it's too lenient a drugs policy.
Well, I mean, enforcement approaches have been tried with different levels of intensity all around the world. And what there isn't is any clear link between the intensity of enforcement and the level of use. And that's not a conclusion that just Transform has come to. This is a conclusion that the Home Office came to in their own evidence-based review, and as has World Health Organization reviews and many others. It seems that as a form of deterrence, it's very ineffective user-level enforcement, but what it does do is it actually encourages risky behaviours and makes drugs more dangerous and drives people away from the kinds of health services that can actually help them reduce the risks that they're exposed to. I
mean, £1.6 billion a year is spent tackling drug use.
Can I just make a point, though, that what Mr. Rolls has just said is incorrect. In both Japan and South Korea, enforcement is effective. These are democratic, law-governed, free countries. They enforce their laws against drug possession. Drug abuse is much smaller. The Home Office,
What about Portugal? Let me ask you, because we're trying to have a conversation. What about Portugal, where
decriminalisation... The Home Office report of which he speaks slid over Japan with a slightly racialist remark about how they had a different culture. We had a different culture in this country, and we enforced our drug laws before about 1967. They have a different culture because they enforce theirs. Portugal is hugely overstated.
Well, let me just explain about Portugal for people watching. Okay, decriminalisation there has happened, and now drug-related deaths are what? Death rate is 3 per million citizens versus 45 per million citizens in Britain here. That suggests it works.
There are several problems with Portugal. First of all, what they did in 2001 was codify what was already happening. Secondly, there's no reliable statistics of drug use before they changed the law. Thirdly, a number of things have happened. Lifetime use of drugs has increased. Petty crime, theft has increased, murder increased immediately afterwards, and the number of people who die as a result of drugs is not by any means the only problem. The main threat from drugs in particularly the Western world now comes from marijuana, which is closely correlated with irreversible mental illness.
Come back to marijuana.
It's not death, but
if you could just take on what he said about Portugal and decriminalisation.
Well, I mean, Portugal has been, I think, by most objective reviews, a remarkable success. There hasn't been an explosion in use. Problematic use, particularly injecting drug use, which is obviously the most risky type of drug use, has gone down. School-age drug use has gone down. So two key vulnerable groups. We've actually seen a reduction in use. There's been a reduction in the prison population, reduction in HIV transmissions, and a dramatic drop in drug deaths. And that's why it now has cross-party support, it has popular support, and their position has been broadly adopted and is now advocated by the World Health Organization, across the UN, and many others.
But you'll notice he hasn't addressed any of the points that I made. That the law was already extremely weak in Portugal. Actually, Portugal came late to the drug festival and doesn't have very high use of drugs compared with many Western European countries. There is no real evidence that it's benefited the country, and quite a lot that it's done considerable harm.
So let me put your point about marijuana to you now. Marijuana, particular strains of marijuana...
Let's call it cannabis.
OK, cannabis, skunk... cause mental health problems, potentially?
Well, I mean, I don't want to get into a debate around the extent of risk, but let's just say all drug use is risky and cannabis is no exception. But however risky...
So then why shouldn't the state want to curb its use?
Well, the state is perfectly free to want to curb use of any drug. The question is prohibition an effective way to do that, and does it reduce overall harm? Now, however risky a drug is, it's more risky when you hand control of it over to unregulated gangsters and street dealers. And cannabis is a good example where it has become more potent and more dangerous under prohibition.
That is a fallacy. When the campaign for cannabis legalization at the moment, in the Proposition 64 in California, calls for advertising of cannabis.
Well, I don't agree with that.
Well, maybe you don't, but the people, the big billionaire money which is behind this, a particular lobby, does agree with it and put it in Proposition 64 for a reason. If you look at cigarettes, for instance, a drug which is regulated as you wish cannabis to be, which is advertised and sold widely,
and used as halved in the last couple of decades.
It does, because you know what I'm going to say. It does enormously more damage than any illegal drug because it's able to advertise. It has access to high street shops. It has access to advertising.
Not anymore. And use is going down.
It will have if Proposition 64 is implemented.
Well, I don't agree with that. There are different.
I don't agree with it, but the billionaire campaign.
Well, there are different types of regulation.
Which is working for this does agree with it.
There are different types of regulation, Peter, and I don't agree with every type of legal regulation. And I think we need to learn the lessons from alcohol and tobacco and make sure that when cannabis is legalised and regulated and where that's happening, that we do it properly. If you look at someone like Uruguay, they don't allow advertising, and that's one that we specifically worked on.
But let's come back to the point about testing.
Advertising is done at the rock festivals and by rock stars anyway.
OK, you've come back to rock festivals. Let's come back to testing, because that would save lives. Therefore, that would surely be a good thing, wouldn't it?
Only if it weren't a deliberate campaign to undermine the idea that the law should be obeyed.
It's just decriminalisation by the back door.
Absolutely, what this does is it gives the impression that the law isn't being enforced and doesn't matter. People who've purchased an illegal drug, which it is illegal to possess, then take it into other people who, with no intervention from a totally absent police force, then test this illegal poison to discover how poisonous it is.
This is a
mockery.
This isn't a monologue, it's a discussion.
The police have to balance their responsibility to enforce the law with their responsibility of care for the people they are looking after in the context of an event. The police are amongst the most enthusiastic advocates of these sorts of facilities, along with the local public health authorities and along with the event organisers, because they know that they work. And we've seen where these facilities have been introduced, the number of deaths and the number of critical emergency cases drops dramatically.
I'm afraid you're going to have to take this argument outside. Mr. Hitchens, you're going to have to take this argument outside. Hello, I'm trying to speak to you, Peter Hitchens.
I know you are.
Steve, thank you very much for joining us.